Hi there. Good day and welcome to our first talk in the series To Be or Not to Be, That is the Question. I'm Dietmar Wensker. The first week is going to be very different to what you may expect, because to be able to talk about science in the context of Christianity, as non-scientists, you've got to understand some concepts beforehand. And I think to get us all on the same page, I just want to make sure that we all understand what we mean by worldview and paradigms and science, what that actually means, and truth and knowledge and all these sort of terms. And in week 2, then, we are looking at the origin of life. We're looking at cosmology later and geology, and also a bit closer at natural law. And then, of course, there's always something else in the universe than just mass and energy. And that seems to be information. And information is necessary to build complexity. And in the end, it is also very important if what we observe out there appears to be designed by somebody, even though atheists and maybe people of different worldviews will not agree with that. Okay. Let's have a look where we can go. The purpose of this series of talks is, of course, not to prove the existence of God, or for me to win an argument against anybody who differs in opinion, or, oh no, behold that I proselyte you. No, I don't want to do that. But by thinking carefully over the next couple of sessions, you hopefully proselyte yourself. What I mean is that you would look at the evidence, the stuff that I bring forward to you to consider and to contemplate, and then make up your own mind. Because I'm not here to actually convert you. That is the role of God Himself. But I want to show you that it is rational and reasonable to believe in a Creator God. It is much more rational and reasonable than to believe in a sort of random, probability-driven process without purpose and with no real scientific basis, as you will see. The probability calculation, in fact, is mind-boggling, and the odds are zero, as you will see later. I also want you, as part of the purpose, I also want to encourage you to research yourself, seek insight, with some smart thinking, and maybe convince you to become an explorer of the truth. I also want you to look on both sides of the fence. You know, I read as many books I can written by atheists, atheistic scientists. I watch their videos, I listen to their comments, I listen to their arguments. And I think when you look at the detail of what we are discussing in the next 5 weeks, you should look on both sides of the fence. But also, be honest with yourself. Reflect and consider the evidence honestly. Now, just to my person, I grew up in Germany. I got a very agnostic background, I would say, and I'm a convicted Christian since 1974. I continue to study God's Word, and because I'm scientifically wired, also God's world. Of course, you can see where my worldview is here. But I've always been interested in science, such as astronomy, space exploration, but also geology and chemistry and stuff like that. I got into engineering. I absolutely love hardcore science engineering, and you can't argue with physics. And physics is always right. And physics and mathematics I consider as the fingerprint of God. For me, there is no conflict at all between Christianity and science, but once again, that's because of my worldview, as we will discuss later. For me, operational science and the universe outside there is tangible, it's ordered, it's structured, it's logical. And in fact, the greatest scientists of the past, in terms of their contribution in the various fields that they were working in, were actually confessing Christians. Not much is ever said about that, but the list is very, very long. And my work background is working on very, very complex and multidisciplinary engineering programs. I always learned to see the bigger picture, the bigger system, and that required systems thinking, but also to focus on the detail, because my speciality in the beginning as a young engineer was aerodynamics and gas dynamics and a bit of propulsion. So to describe purpose, function, and interaction at the highest level of an engineering program, you had to make sure that the design and development goals of all the critical subsystems would also be achieved. So that helped me a lot to understand what God's Word is all about and what God's world is all about and how the two are actually compatible. I applied this approach to study and learning about creation and the Bible and the Creator, and also by reading and evaluating ideas on both sides of the fence, as I said already, especially when it comes to the question of origin, which is a very important one. What has it done for me? Well, I know who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going, not just intellectually, but also in my spirit, deep down in my heart, if I can put it like that. Yes, I am an engineer. Yes, I am a scientist. Although, like any other person, of course, I faced my share of big and small challenges and failures. I almost always, though, experienced enduring peace. And that peace that no human being can really understand unless you have it, is something you can only get if you are in a relationship with your Creator. But as you will hopefully see later, to be a Christ follower is much more rational and reasonable in the light of overwhelming evidence from science. I certainly don't have enough faith to be an atheist, that's for sure. So it is my hope that by sharing my personal insights of science in the next 5 weeks with you, will at least make you think and consider where you stand. Most of you are probably of Christian background, and it is mainly for you that this series was developed, but everyone is welcome. Today's talk will be a bit tougher than the next 5 weeks will be, believe it or not. In week 1, the foundational concepts for me are perspectives and worldviews and paradigm, knowledge and the truth and the absolute laws of the universe, and what is science in this picture, and what is truth, and how do they fit together. And then just very briefly on models of origin, which we will discover much, much later. So let's start with the paradigms. The point is this, that your paradigm or worldview determines your way of thinking, your way of understanding the world, the values that you have, the attitude that you have to your surroundings, to your people, to your work. The behavior that you display will show it very clearly. Are you task or people-driven, living your passion? Are you kind, emphatic, humble? Or are you ego-driven and rude and inconsiderate? You know, that has a lot to do with your worldview. And your moral compass, of course. Do you have a conscience? Do you know what is right and wrong? Are you authentic? Are you reliable? You see, the worldview determines your real identity as a human being. And there are many worldviews, of course. There's a Christian worldview. There are other religions and sects, maybe Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, etc. There's humanist, of course, and atheistic worldview, and the communist worldview, if you like. But in a sense, I have to put it to you, there are only really two choices. You're either created or you don't believe in a creator. There's only these two choices. So that's all I wanted to say about the worldview. Now I want to speak about knowledge and the truth very quickly. Knowledge can be factual or experiential. I mean, factual is how many million people live in this country, and experiential is, oh, I touched a hot stove plate, and now I know that when I touch there, it is hot. Children learn it very quickly. But storytelling is not the same as knowledge, although it needs some knowledge to tell a story, I suppose. But speculation is also not the same as having knowledge. You need perspective, your worldview, plus the knowledge that you get in your learning, wherever you learned, in life, at university, at school, whatever, plus maybe some in-depth thinking, research, and scholarship possibly. And then it requires discernment. I call it wisdom. And that can lead you to the truth. But it's all these summed up together that can lead to the truth, not one of them on their own. So the fixed and absolute laws really give you the truth, because these laws are there. They are real. So that's the truth. That's it. And there are physical laws. They're omnipresent wherever you go in the universe. They're unchangeable. And if you break them, or let me say, if you ignore them, there are immediate consequences. If something goes wrong, no, let me put it very easily. If you don't understand or even want to believe there is such a thing as gravity, and you want to jump off a 2-meter wall, you'll know there is gravity. But if you jump off a 5-meter wall, then the consequences could be a lot tougher. So the physical laws, if broken, act immediately. You put your finger in the plug and Eskom is actually working, then you will get shocked. There are moral laws. They can also be broken. I can fight with somebody. I can hate somebody. I can cheat somebody and all that. But most likely, all these things will catch up with me a little bit later. You know that saying, what turns around comes around. And then there are also spiritual laws. Yes, it doesn't matter if you believe in them or not. They are there. It's like gravity. You don't believe it? Tough is. There are spiritual laws. And they're immutable. And they're eternal. And the high risk here is, if you ignore those, it has enormous repercussions. And it's very high risk for you as a person. Now, let me now get to the science part. You know, science that you and I know is operational science. Operational science is always based on an idea, a hypothesis, some observation that led up to this hypothesis. And then we do some experiments based on this hypothesis. And if we can prove that this hypothesis is correct, we can make it a theory. But it really only is a theory if it never gets falsified. Now that's a fancy word for saying, if we say that gravity always attracts an apple or the moon or Jupiter or whatever, and only once we find that it doesn't, then we either have a miracle or that law is not applicable. It's not a law, actually. So operational science, if falsified as a theory just once, it's not a theory, okay? And mathematics is a very essential tool in this. But on the other side, we also have historical science. And it is the historical science where we have a real problem, because they make claims from about history or something that happened in the deep past, and they are mostly based on conjecture and models that were made up by somebody. We'll get to that. And there's a lot of storytelling. It's not based on observation. It is sometimes based on a hypothesis, but it can never be proven because there is no experimentation. You cannot repeat the past, and so it cannot be validated. But there's a third sort of aspect of science, and that is forensic science. Now, forensic science is mainly lab-based, and in its analytical methods, it is very much like operational science. But forensic science is based on assumptions which may or may not be true, as of course all you crime movie watchers or aircraft crash investigation people would testify to. So we have operational science, we have historical science, and forensic science. Now, operational science, as I already said, is based on physics, maths, and chemistry and information. And the result is that we can build smartphones and GPSs and aircraft. And we have a company called Tesla. We have SpaceX. We have pharmacology. We have power stations. We have New Horizon, a space explorer flying to Pluto over 15 years and 9 billion miles or 5 billion miles, whatever it was. And that is operational science. Now, astronomy is also operational science, but not cosmology. Cosmology is more concerned about the origin of the universe and how that came about. Material science is hard operational science, like concrete or food or carbon fiber or superconductors. That is hard operational science. Information science and computers could be classified as operational science, and medicine, but mainly the research part and the design of devices like MRIs and CAT scanners and so on. And especially today with genetics, we've really learned a lot about medicine. And there's the whole pharmacological aspect, of course, as well. And robotics, and artificial intelligence, and bionics. Biomimics engineering is a new branch of engineering. And megastructures, like massive buildings and dams and so on. Almost all man-made artifacts are actually based on operational science. Now, operational science can describe behavior in the material universe almost perfectly, especially with mathematics. Newtonian physics works on Earth and the solar system in almost perfect correlation. Perfect. Einstein came along and said, okay, we're missing something here. Einstein physics is a genial refinement of Newtonian physics. And that's what relativity is all about. But we're not going to go there. Not now, anyway. But I give you one example. If you use your GPS, do you know that the satellite clocks run faster that are going around and around the Earth to give you the GPS position that you're in? And they run faster by only about 38 microseconds a day than the ones on the Earth. Now, the difference, if you do not adjust those satellites' clocks every single day, is about 400 meters off per hour. So there's relativity in working, okay? The cells of the human body would also be one of those at medical practitioner level. You look at the body differently than at a lab when you investigate maybe the blood constituents and so on of a blood test. But at DNA research level, you find out what is really going on in biology, and that is deep and very smart and very complex. And in astronomy as well. We've got the Square Kilometre Array here in South Africa, a fantastic engineering feat, together with astronomers, the Hubble telescope. We learn about all sorts of things, gravity waves and so on. We observe, we measure, and we repeat. Historical science, of course, like archaeology, anthropology, cosmology, as I mentioned already, is something that is an interpretation of evidence. It's not really theories we're talking about, but it is conjecture. Maybe good ones, but still it's conjecture. Sometimes it's ridiculous wishful thinking with very little experimental evidence. And often the experts in the field have large differences of opinion, especially when it comes to fossils and the age of man and the origin of language and the age of the Grand Canyon and ice age issues and so on. And such theories are not really theories by definition. They're ideas, okay? But then when it comes to Darwinian evolution, which is now 150 years old, 160 years old, people are still stuck there when genetics tells us a totally different story. It's a little bit like astrology. Astrology used to be a science in the Middle Ages. I hope there are not too many of you who are still hung up on astrology and thinking it's a science. And it gets worse with UFOs and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, of course. But all these things are almost always based on debatable assumptions and conjecture and personal opinion and storytelling. It gets really bad when it comes to the fossils that are identified as apes or man and all that sort of stuff. We're still going to go there. So when we look at nature and its laws and science, then we see that in nature, for every effect there is a cause. If you see an effect, there's been a cause that caused that effect. The other point I want you to really understand is nature exists, right? It's real. We're not living in a matrix. We're not part of a computer program. But this nature exists and is regulated by these laws. And in substance, nature's laws are prescriptive. These words are important. Nature is prescriptive and non-negotiable. It is what it is. The laws of nature cannot be violated by man with impunity. There will be an immediate reaction when you break a law of nature. It is very structured and very ordered. The maths we have developed and the physics we understand and the chemistry we understand as humankind now, I mean, not me necessarily, and the energy that we can manipulate and understand and convert from one form to another, and information manipulation like we do with big data and all that sort of thing, is part of the prescriptive nature of nature. It's always valid, and it's always valid everywhere in the universe. It is consistent, it's omnipresent, but here is the thing, it is discoverable. Human beings that can think rational and reasonable thoughts can actually discover these laws of nature, and that is of course what happened in the Western world over the last 500 years. And by the way, many of these key discoveries of the natural laws were actually achieved in what the atheists want to tell us were the Dark Ages. No, they were not the Dark Ages. That's when most of these scientific principles were actually discovered by, may I tell you, Christian scientists, scientists who were real believers. Nature consists of a lot of laws which are acting like a universally interdependent system of systems. That sounds a bit abstract, but what I mean is that everything in this universe, from the collision of galaxies to the solar system that we're living on the Earth inside there in the Milky Way somewhere, it all is universally interdependent. It all works together. To the last detail on the DNA, and the biggest part out there, outer space with the galaxies. It's beautiful. It's awesome. It's indescribable, even if we can describe a lot of it mathematically already. And you know what the amazing thing is? It actually works consistently. The sun rises every morning. It works. But that is nature. Now, what does science do? Well, science actually just means knowledge. And it is based on human constructs and the worldview, as we said already. It's based on fundamental assumptions, namely axioms. Those are self-evident truths. Okay, we must also remember that. It should be based on observation and investigation, which operational science very much does. So it's based on hypothesis and experiments and validation, and then it becomes a theory. It's exclusively materialistic science. Oh yes, we work with maths and physics and chemistry and energy and material and possibly information, but we say there is no divinity involved here. There is no creator involved. That is the basic assumption, okay? Right or wrong, but that's what it is in science. Philosophical perspective is often dominant in science. There's a bias in the paradigms, of course, in the interpretation and inferences, and even in the presentation of results. Whenever we find another bone in some cave, then the controversy starts right away. Here's another link in the ape to man sort of story. And once you get into it, you find speculation upon speculation upon speculation upon speculation. And theories and paradigms change often in science. And that's okay. Because as we learn new things, we have to adjust our ideas and we have to maybe remodel some of our ideas. So why do we actually believe scientists? Well, the main thing is that scientists are usually working in such depth in their particular area of work that a person who is not from that discipline can actually not really follow. Well, that's what people think. It's actually not so difficult, as I would like to try and show you in the next 5 weeks. So can scientists be wrong? Of course. And they often are. We often are. The two things here to remember is that it is prescriptive and descriptive. Remember, the law of nature is prescriptive. The science is descriptive. It is describing something outside there. Now, if nature is prescriptive, somebody must have prescribed it. Or do you think, or do you really believe that the laws of nature are just there? That's it. They're just there. Remember, if they're there, they had a cause. Because if they're there, that's the effect, and every effect in this universe has a cause. Be prescriptive, we require knowledge, information, intelligence. The laws of physics are prescriptive. Now, by figuring these out, these laws of physics, we develop the practical application, like GPSs, smartphones, and motor cars, and aeroplanes, and so on, with intelligence, yes. Scientists are generally very intelligent people. But scientists, too, have a philosophy. They have a paradigm. They have a bias. And science is descriptive of the phenomena, as we already said. Science can often describe this very well and still not know for sure. And a very, very good example is DNA, where in the beginning when it was discovered, we were wondering what a sort of Pandora's box of information is there in this DNA. And then most of it we couldn't describe, so we called it junk DNA. Now, that was considered by biologists as one of the greatest mistakes ever made in biology, to call it junk DNA, because as we go along, we are discovering that this junk DNA, in other words, the DNA we couldn't describe very well, is very, very important. Very important, and it has a purpose. So, you remember, science is the process to formulate these laws through observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and validation. And if it is falsified just once, it is no longer a valid theory. Science is absolutely amazing, but it is descriptive. We're describing nature, which is there already. That makes us intelligent, but it's not very prescriptive. I would say that modern discoveries in diverse fields of science make a framework for a created world by a creator more and more rational, more reasonable, more convincing. That is what the next 5 weeks is all about. I want to show you that the real evidence is often underreported and misrepresented. In fact, some current scientific models are based on a preferred philosophy. Those are opinions, people, rather than a rigorous scientific process. We need to look at the bigger picture in a systems thinking context, and that starts with our worldview and our perspective. The stumbling block is often Genesis, and Scripture in general, of course. Genesis is the most foundational record for the Christian belief system, and that's why it is targeted. It is disparaged, and those who believe in its veracity get ridiculed. I know. That's why I did a whole series of Bible studies actually on Genesis from a scientific perspective. But also by those who on philosophical grounds cannot accept the existence of a creator, Genesis is just a non-event, okay? So, are atheists by willful choice? Yes, of course they are. But the fuss is really about origin. Because if atheists could only prove that no creator was involved in the creation of this universe and us in particular, then they would consider they won with their philosophy. So what have we got? There are only 2 shows in town. If you want to find out where do I come from, what am I doing here, have I got any purpose, and where am I going, There are only two options. You're either created and you have purpose, and there's a reason for you to be here, and you're reasonable and you're rational, and you also have a destiny. There is life after death. Yes, there is. Or the second option is you are an accident. You're a temporary flare-up like the flowers in the Makwa land after the rain, but that has no meaning. Everything is empty and dark, and that is a terrible thing, irrelevant. Your life's irrelevant. Your being here is irrelevant. An atheist, what hope have they got? When they die, it's lights out and what? So these two shows in town that I invoke here depend on your worldview. Option 1, you are created by a creator. Option 2, you are a random accident at molecular level that over eons and eons increased in complexity and perfection until we got you and you and you and you from some goo in the past via the zoo to you. Well, I wish you good luck, because at molecular level, biogenesis has never been observed from non-living chemicals. Never, never, never. If you increase in complexity and perfection, you would say we are evolving in a positive direction. I hate to put it to you, there is such a thing as genetic entropy. And as humanity, we're actually going downhill pretty fast in terms of genetics. More about that next week. So, there is a big difference to have a purpose or to be irrelevant. I'm sure you would agree. There is no hope for those who have no bigger picture view of this universe, because then you are hopeless without hope in an uncaring, cold, pointless universe. Totally pointless. Meaninglessness of life. Yeah, we could put it like that. No future, just emptiness. But here's the thing. People invoke science to show that you are an accident, random and irrelevant, because that's all there is to say if you do not have a creator. But it's not as simple as that, because once you get into the nitty-gritty of scientific process, you find the truth, and the truth is not what an atheist is really looking for. At least option 1 may be worth thinking about when we investigate some of the sciences over the next 5 weeks. I'm looking forward to your questions. Let's make it interesting, amicable, and respectful. I've talked a little bit longer than I had planned, but the reason is simply this. In this first week, we got to get some of the fundamental things out of the way, or at least that we're all on the same page, and now next week we'll really get going with biology. Hope to see you there. But now for the questions.